Ladies and gentlemen, we do thank you very much for your attention, and now we invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the
Welcome to our top travel destinations. I am your host, Kevin Flanagan. I have been editor of the weekly travel news column in the Sunday Independent and the Fine Wine and Food Guide, and I am here to use my decades of experience to help you know exactly where to stay, eat, drink, shop, and explore when visiting the world's top travel destinations. So sit back and enjoy the wonders of travel as we take off on our magical journey together. Welcome to Kevin's Top Travel Destination. And this episode we are visiting one of the great cities in the world. It's the smallest city and the smallest state with the biggest reputation. Yes, I'm talking about Vatican City. I'm going to try to give you a personal tour of one of my favorite destinations. Everybody knows about the Vatican and the great history, Michelangelo, the popes, the wars, the controversies. It's a hotbed. Sometimes people ask me when I'm talking about the various times I visited the Vatican, I'll give you a little overview of that in a second, do you need to be Catholic to visit Vatican City? Well, I think it's quite clear. The old meaning of Catholic with a small c means universal. And it is a city that has something for everyone, including those who are not interested in religion in any way, shape or form. As I say, I've been there on many occasions. The first time when I was 19 and studying history of art with my great pal Paul. Then, very poignantly, when my mother passed away in 2007. I did a separate podcast on that called My Miracle in Rome, which I think you would like and enjoy. And then more recently, I took my grandson Kuba there with the whole family. I wanted to show him and little Maya one of my favorite and most impressive places. So before we dive into the history, where do you stay in Vatican City? It is a very small place. And to be quite straight up with you, there are not many places to stay in the actual Vatican City, as there are very few restaurants or bars or shops, apart from the usual tourist stuff. But if you go to the nearby streets, or you go to the Via Nazionale, which is the huge thoroughfare which runs all the way down from Sant'Angelo, the huge palace where the Pope used to retreat when he was under attack, Sant'Angelo, you look up that Via Nazionale, and at the top you will see Michelangelo's facade and the dome. It's crowded with bars and restaurants. A lot of them, to be honest, are touristy, but still, you can sit there, have your pasta, and you can still pay just €1.50 for an espresso on this, one of the busiest tourist thoroughfares and pilgrim thoroughfares in the world. So sometimes Rome and the Italians don't rip you off. They have a reputation for sometimes being a little bit tough on tourists, but if you're careful and you ask for the price beforehand, I think you're going to be looked after. And certainly around the Vatican City, there are places to stay that have all tastes, all levels, all budgets. My own favorite is actually in the Vatican City, and this is the Residenze Paolo VI. He was a great pope, and this extraordinary place was once a monastery, and his name was attached to it. And now it is an actual public hotel. It is right in the heart of the Vatican City. You're next to the Congregation for the Faith. If you go onto the rooftop bar, you'll see right across to the Pope's own private apartments, and on your left, a stone's throw away, is the facade of St. Peter's Basilica and Michelangelo's Great Dome. It's an extraordinary place to stay. There are quite a lot of priests and religious and pilgrims who stay there, but they have a full bar. You can drink and smoke and have a bit of fun. And it's quite decadent, I think, to stand or sit up there in the garden, breathing in the lemons and the beautiful herbs that are growing there, and hearing the pounding when the great bells of the basilica chime off. You actually can almost feel it vibrating through your body. You look to the right, and there, over the Tiber are the larks creating these tens of thousands of geometrical patterns in the sky. It is a sensational place to be. So check out the Residenza Paolo. There is the six. There are also fabulous hotels, world-class hotels such as the Hassler, which I've had the honor to be in and eat in and stay in, and that by the Spanish Steps is a good ride away. You'll have to get a taxi or a bus. Airbnb also have offerings. But again, from pensione to five-star hotels, there's everything you need in Rome. And Vatican City is not more than a half-hour bus ride, an hour's walk if you're up to it, depending on where you actually end up in the city. But again, if you draw a line around Vatican City itself and go onto some of the main websites, you will find accommodation that suits your needs. Now, what to do in Vatican City? Well, there are basically 4 main activities which I'm going to share with you today and take your hand and take you through. The first thing you have to be aware of in Vatican City is the queues. The queues will kill you. The first time I took my mother there, the one and only time I took my mother there, as I talk about in the podcast, My Miracle in Rome, she was 84 and we came out of the hotel right next to the Vatican Residenza, and I was about to take her into St. Peter's when I looked back and there was a mile-long line. I kid you not. I'd say there was a good 2.5 hours of waiting in 28-degree heat. Now, an 84-year-old woman is not going to be able to deal with that, nor would most people be able to deal with that. So how do we avoid the queues? Well, on this occasion, I used my press pass and I got some help and got her in. If you don't have those privileges or you don't have those opportunities, come early. 7 a.m. is when the city opens. At 7 a.m., there are no other tourists there, unless it's a big feast day or a celebration by the Pope. You rock up at 7 a.m. in St. Peter's Square, and all the huge airport security desks and the panels that you have to go through and around and the queuing and the waiting, they don't apply. You can walk straight into the Basilica. And what's good about St. Peter's and the Vatican City is, if it's anything to do with the Pope and prayer, it's free. If you want to go to the museum, as we'll find, or the Dome, you pay, but not an awful lot. But to avoid the queues and to avoid the heat, go early. Or, alternatively, go just before everything closes at 6. If you turn up there at 5:30, again, you'll walk straight in, no queues. So what do you see in the square? Well, you have the extraordinary fountains, the obelisk, and this Bernini. It's a square, but actually it's a circle. The Bernini arms, the arcades, the columns that come out to you. And they were created in order to give the sense of the church reaching out to welcome its pilgrims. Whatever you think about the Catholic Church, they did know how to build these extraordinary masterpieces. And remember, St. Peter's is the biggest church by far on the planet. So after you've spent some time taking your photos, looking around St. Peter's Square, particularly if it's early and you have the place to yourself, you can then, I suggest, number 2, go into the Basilica of St. Peter's itself, the world's largest church. And I'll give you an idea of what you're going to experience if you haven't already been in. And I'll remember, most poignantly, taking my ancient mother, and she held my arm, and we walked up. And this is what we saw. Firstly, you'll be greeted by the Bernini sculptures. These massive Moses and the prophets and the saints, they're staggering. You will see possibly the most famous sculpture in the world, which is the Pieta by Michelangelo, which was damaged by a deranged madman a few years ago and is now behind glass. Sadly, that is absolutely wonderful. Bizarrely, you will see some dead popes. They seem to like preserving the bodies and putting them behind glass, and you can actually see them. There's a few around the interior of the basilica. Pope Innocent, for example, lies there, and he's been around for a good while. And then there's Bernini's Baldacchino, this structure which goes over the altar and rises in this circular, like a serpent, 4 serpents going up. And then, right above you, that never fails to take my breath away. And I've been in St. Peter's many times and knelt at Mass in St. Peter's. When you look up at the dome, Michelangelo's famous dome, sense of awe fills me at any rate, and I think you will as well. And what's wonderful, you'll also hear the masses going on, the bells chiming, the little bells on the altar, and these different languages. As you walk around, each altar will have a French Mass, a German Mass, a Japanese Mass, an Argentinian Mass. It's extraordinary, the different notes and the voices and the richness and the flavour. And then the smell, this unique smell of incense that wafts around. And then the light at the very back of St. Peter's, another beautiful stained glass window with the peace dove right in the centre and rays of the sun coming to greet you. I have to say, I can remember the first time I went with my friend Paul as a student of art history. I was actually knocked out by the magnificence, because I'd been studying it for 6 years and had never seen it, just in photographs and maps and architectural drawings. And here I was. And I can remember going, it's all too much. And I sort of freaked out in a good way. Again, it's this sense of awe that you will feel. And just before 6 o'clock is a lovely time to be inside the basilica, to catch maybe some Latin choral mass being sung, the way that the notes eddy and echo over this vast space. So that's the basilica. Definitely worth 2-hour visit at the very minimum. And I think if you were going to do St. Peter's Square in the basilica, that's half a day, almost a day's worth. And in the heat, it may be enough. So ideally, I try to spread your visit to the Vatican over 2 days. And on day 2, you would go to the Vatican Museum and the famous Sistine Chapel. Now, this is at a different entrance. You can catch a metro to go there. And it's round. You'll see the walls, these huge walls that protected the popes in the 15th century from attack, because the Austrian and Hungarians all came down and they tried to pillage Rome, and Rome was pillaged. In fact, the Pope was so attacked that he had built an underground passage which took him all the way to the Castello Sant'Angelo down at the end, which was a fortification very difficult to break into. We have seen in movies and in films and in Dan Brown novels variations on the secrets of the Vatican, and it's all really rather good fun and interesting. But if you go to the museum, be prepared for a slog. It is the 5th largest museum in the world. There are 54 galleries and millions of artifacts, so there's no point in trying to see every room. You're just going to be bewildered. The other thing is, if you don't go early, the crowds will actually crush you. It's so thronged. So be very specific in what you need. I would say pick a couple of things. Raphael's stanzas, his rooms are magnificent. I would also try to find the Van Gogh Pieta, which is an extraordinary work of art. But it is crowded, and if you're claustrophobic, just be careful. And do remember, there are very strict dress codes. You have to cover your arms and you have to cover your knees. And if you turn up, you will be turned away. It doesn't matter if you've waited 3 hours in the sun. They're very, very strict, quite sort of angsty as well in the Vatican. And you will be pushed back and put in your box if you try to, and also to take photos as well. So if you're going to go to the Sistine Chapel, which is at the end of the journey through the actual museum itself, you end up in this surprisingly small space. It's so famous that it's bizarre actually standing there and going, oh, there's Michelangelo's ceiling. And it's so small that looking up, it's very difficult to see the hand of God and Adam. What's more available is the Last Judgment on the wall behind the altar, the main altar. And this you can see and take in. Not my particular cup of tea. I don't think it's Michelangelo's greatest work. It's very big and impressive and a bit grim, really. But you'll have done the Sistine Chapel. Just don't take out your camera because they'll confiscate it. And then, after 2 hours, 3 hours max, go down these spiral stairs which will flush you out into the warm breeze of a Roman afternoon, which is actually very, very pleasant. And then finally, the final thing I would do, maybe on the afternoon of your 2-day trip to really tick the boxes on the Vatican City, is go up to the dome. Now, when you stand in front of St. Peter's and you look up from the square, you'll see Michelangelo's dome. And at the very top, a little small speck, which is actually a rather big viewing area. And when Michelangelo built his dome, he did it as 2 shells that nearly met. And there's a stairway going up and a stairway going down. But it's at an angle and it's very cramped. Now, I have to give you a serious warning to anybody who's not fit or who's claustrophobic. And I've seen some bad incidents going up to the dome, which I've done on numerous occasions. When I took my mother there, who was 84, as you know, we took the lift. But the lift only takes you up to the first flat floor, which is where the actual facade ends and the dome starts. You'll have to climb physically up this narrow, claustrophobic tunnel. Reminds me a bit of the Gucci tunnels which the Viet Cong used in Vietnam. I got the same claustrophobic feeling there as well. So you really have to be careful about going up. I can remember one incident when a rather large and overweight American got stuck. He couldn't actually put one foot in front of the other, and of course nobody could pass him. And there's a sort of a little bit of a sense of panic because there's nobody up there to keep the crowd going. So be aware if you're unfit and if you're claustrophobic, don't try the dome. You do get some respite halfway up when you're actually flushed out into the surrounds, the interior of St. Peter's, and you can walk around the dome and look down at the Baldacchino. That's pretty impressive. But when you get to the top, and if you make it to the top, what a sight. The whole of St. Peter's spreads out in front of you. It's an iconic view which is very difficult and awe-inspiring. Difficult to describe, but awe-inspiring nevertheless. And what I noticed, like all great high buildings, they're built so that they can go with the wind. And I can remember even standing on the dome at the very pinnacle of St. Peter's, when a gust of wind shook the building, you felt it move slightly, which, like a plane, it has to do, otherwise it would crack. And of course, going down is a lot easier than going up, but still, I have also bumped into people who have had an accident, slipped, hurt themselves on the way down. And there can be a backlog, and that can be a bit scary. So finally, I would say you don't need to pay to see the Pope. He has an audience every Tuesday. If you want to see him in the St. Peter's Square after Mass on the Sunday morning, around about 11, check local details. He'll come out in the room opposite where I was staying with my mother and my sister at the Residenza Paolo VI, and across you'll see the papal flag is lowered and the Pope comes out, talks to the crowd in all the languages that he has, and most popes talk multiple languages, and gives a blessing. And that's wonderful. You can also have the private audience with the Pope, which is done in the hall adjacent to St. Peter's itself. You have to pay to go into the Vatican Museum. I think it's around about €17 and about €8 to go to the top of the dome. Just check availability. You can buy online. But for me, 2 days, if you give yourself 2 days, if you make yourself well hydrated, bring water because it gets very hot. Don't do long trips around the museum because you'll get exhausted and bewildered. And don't do the dome if in any way you're unfit and you're prone to not like closed spaces. Other than that, Vatican City, you have to tick it off your bucket list. You can do it in 2 days, and for me, it is really one of the top magnificent destinations. It's given me great comfort in life going there with my family and my mother, who died soon after visiting St. Peter's. And as she always said, see Rome and die. So I would definitely try to see Rome before you die, because it is one of our top travel destinations.